Photography Daily.
I was thinking I was going to explode as a portrait photographer in Sydney, but obviously, that didn't happen. I realised that the competition here was fierce.
Today, Michael Quelch from Sydney with a new style Monday Focus edition on making portraits, headshots, and starting new in a city where you don't know anybody.
I can't just shoot pictures. I have to learn about business, otherwise I'll never be able to do it as my career. You set up a test shoot and then all of a sudden they're introducing you to people for not a test shoot purpose. It's referrals and they become your ambassadors. And sometimes you just need to really simplify it and really think, well, if I want to shoot actors, I need to know actors. I need to meet them. I need to be around them. I need to be in the scene. A lot of the time when people contact me, it's because I do have a darker tone and it is a little bit more dramatic and they notice that. I still can't quite articulate what it is, but when you look in the mirror, it's like you instantly shape yourself to how you want to see yourself. What we do as photographers is so valuable because to experience that, you can't, I couldn't actually put money on that. It was a very, very deep experience. For anyone in the photography business or coming into it, I think it's really important to have creative ways to also grab people's attention. You'll have imposter syndrome or you'll have the opposite, which is the Dunning-Kruger effect, where basically you think that you're a lot better than you actually are.
Stories of life told by photographers. And today that photographer is Michael Quelch.
They're always going to come to the studio with a character, and your job is to break that character, to reveal who they truly are.
A new month, a new season of the show begins. On Mondays, we talk with photographers worldwide, digging a little deeper into their business stories, a focus on how they work and what they did to launch, where they are now and what the future holds. A chance to hear their stories to help your own. And on Wednesdays, photo story editions, talking as ever with book authors, the legends, the photojournalists and those working on longer-term projects with a story to share. And of course, on Fridays, the Photo Walk, the mailbag edition of the week, where you share your feelings about what you hear, what you're photographing. We play some inspirational clips and just spend time together out of the studio walking and photographing. Patron of the day today is a supporter we now just seem to know as D. Could this be a new character to look forward to in Line of Duty? Now we know the secret of H. Say no more, in case some of you in the UK are still to watch on catch-up. But D has found a real joy on his new Instagram account called, it's at pic, the numerical 4, pic's sake. Pic for pic's sake, which I'll link to as ever on the show page. Might be easier. And making pictures of the everyday just for the sake of making a picture, that's what his grid is about. And I think that's a breath of fresh air, really. Having an excuse like we need one to just pick up our cameras and take a picture of what we see at that moment, which in Dee's case includes everything from the darkroom red light to a beautiful coastal shot in a place called West Wittering in the UK, to a forlorn-looking Danbo. And if you want to know who Danbo is, then you'll need to visit the link left today. Pic for pic's sake. Now, there is a reason to have what I call an Instamuse account. That extra grid, just for you, just for your stuff on top of business or whatever else you post and have. From the price of one high street coffee per month, patrons are so important to helping maintain a future for this cast. Without them, it couldn't be here in the form you find it as 3 complete full-length photography shows a week. To thank them then, all patrons get to hear the extra Tuesday and Thursday photography diary shows, as I'm now starting to call them, on the easy-to-download Patreon app. Plus, there's the benefit of broadcasting your website, projects or Instagram to thousands of photographers in our Patron of the Day mentions and a meetup once a month on Zoom in our Patreon club. If you're interested, you can go to the Patreon link on our Photography Daily website. We're also supported by mpb.com, who help you buy, sell and trade used camera gear in the US, the UK and Europe. And I think it's important to add that it's a service that I personally use. I've bought used camera gear through MPB because I like the idea of a guarantee on used kit. I've sold kit I no longer use through them, and I've traded gear in against equipment I really want to add to my kit bag. They make every step of the journey fair and easy, and that is why I keep going back to them. So, today's guest, Michael Quelch, based out of Sydney. He's the first of our Monday Focus guests, a focus on business for sure, but not without their own personal stories, as that's what this show has become known for on Mondays and Wednesdays. I like a story where somebody has seemingly gone out on a limb to make their photographic passion their living. And there are, of course, degrees of going out on a limb. For some, that may be tougher if you have family to support. For others, it's tough mentally to split from a part of the country you know, living amongst your friends and family, a roof over your head, dinner on the table, that kind of comfort. So today's guest decided to set up shop in a city where he knew nobody, and in 3 years has made a real success of building a portrait and headshot business. His photographs are not the big, bright, high-key portraits familiarised by many similar studios. He took a different path, different route, as you're about to find out. Empathy and preparation being important to that path. Meet Michael Quelch. So, Michael, you didn't actually come from Australia. Now, you've got the Australian accent, but there's a tinge of other bits in there. One of those being Wales.
Yeah, that's right. I was born in Cardiff, and I grew up in for till I was about 9 years old. I grew up in a town called Barry, which got put on the map from Gavin and Stacey.
Gavin and Stacey.
That's right. Yeah, no one knew about Barry until
Barry
Gavin
Islands.
and Stacey.
Barry Island.
That's the one. Yeah. When you've been there, it makes Gavin and Stacey just that much more comical because of the place itself is just it's a character. The place itself is a character, you know.
Yeah.
It's very yeah.
So not tempted to return and set up your business on Barry Island then?
Not so tempted for that one, Neil. No. That's crossed my mind, mind you.
So look, Australia. So you end up in Australia. Originally, you're on the Gold Coast, but then you made the move to Sydney, the bright lights of Sydney.
The bright lights of Sydney, yeah.
Why? Because the Gold Coast is such a beautiful place.
It is beautiful, and it's what happened was I was on the Gold Coast, and I spent almost 10 years there, and I'd already developed a huge passion for photography at this point, beginning with landscape photography. And in the hinterland of the Gold Coast, the rainforests, it's very underrated, and there's the most beautiful waterfalls, and there's you can go out for every sunrise and you can really never get bored of the landscape of the Gold Coast.
Yeah.
However, I went to Sydney for a short break. I was in Sydney for 3 days. I was so inspired by the amount of people walking around, and at this point I already started shooting people. Similar story to most people, start shooting my friends and, you know, setting up little studio sets in the corners of rooms and stuff like this. And I was just on the train, and I was seeing, I was doing street photography and the people on the train and just the whole vibe of the city. We call it the Big Smoke here in Australia. We call Sydney the Big Smoke. And it was just so inspiring. And then it was actually 3 weeks later, I was living in Sydney. It was that quick.
So what were you doing? What were you working in? Or was this between or following education? Or
So at this point, I was working in a youth hostel. So I was working at the reception desk for quite a big corporation called the YHA. They have hostels all around the world, Hostel and International.
Yeah.
So what I was able, and that was on the side of doing some freelance work on the Gold Coast. So on the Gold Coast, my freelance work was generally within the tourism industry because I already had contacts within the tourism industry. So I was able to get a transfer to one of the hostels in Sydney. So that's why it was such a quick transition. So I was able to go straight. 3 weeks later, I was living in Sydney. So I was thinking I was going to explode as a portrait photographer in Sydney, but obviously, that didn't happen. I realized that the competition here was fierce.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that was exciting, you know.
But whilst, yes, it's exciting, you're setting up against strong names in a city location with a reasonably fresh level of photographic experience, and dare I say, or suggest, an elementary understanding of the business side of photography.
Well, that's right, and I had absolutely no idea about any of these things. I had to learn it all as I was going. I had to learn it through ambition. So it drove me. I basically came to a point where I realized I can't just shoot pictures. I have to learn about business, otherwise I'll never be able to do it as my career. So I bought an online course actually for business, and I just learned the very basics and this, that of marketing, but the basics were so helpful. Once I started putting up competitor analysis of having names of people that are shooting what I want to shoot and knowing who they are and have them on their list. Some people even put their prices on their websites. And I just get a real idea of what is going on in the scene within the top, say, 10 people that where I want to be. And then once you know, I hate to say the word enemy, but you know, for the sake of the word, once you know the enemy, you sort of know where to attack, and then you can use what they're doing and implement it into your own work. But I found what I ended up doing was setting up, using all the money I was making to set up test shoots. And from there, I was meeting lots of people in the theater, actors. And from there, they're super helpful because you set up a test shoot and then all of a sudden they're introducing you to people for not a test shoot purpose. You know, it's referrals, and they become your ambassadors. And even to this day, some of the people that I set up test shoots with that became my friends, they still recommended me to different theater venues or to different actors, whether they're new or seasoned with headshots and whatnot. And it all just came from just being in Sydney and not just being in my room, being frustrated of why nothing's happening, but taking action.
Well, I'm intrigued by the courses you invested in. Are they business courses or photography courses?
Well, I was real hasty to get a course.
Right.
And what I actually bought, I didn't read the description probably. I bought a wedding photography course, but it was still super helpful, even though I haven't shot weddings and I didn't aspire to. What
did you glean then from these this course that you took?
You know what? It's so simple when you think about it, but when you haven't been told the simplest things, you can come up with the most complicated routes to get to your desired place. And sometimes you just need to really simplify it and really think, well, if I want to shoot actors, I need to know actors. I need to meet them. I need to be around them. I need to be in the scene.
And that was your initial focus, wasn't it? Connecting with actors.
At first, yeah, it was actor headshots. I felt like I loved these people. I wanted to be an actor when I was younger, so I felt somewhat relatable to these people. But I like the idea is that they act as different characters. I love the fact that they could adopt different characters to play, and you know that was always a lot of fun. I could come up with scenarios, and then they could react to the scenarios, and I shoot that way. I'm not sure if everyone shoots that way. I'm sure they don't, but that was my way of interacting with actors, and working with actors. I think really helps you when you work with a non-actor. But you use the same methods that you use when you're taking a portrait of an actor. It's just a very fun way of shooting.
In Old Money, this is classic time for print strategy, of course. Be my subject, I need a portfolio, you need shots for your own one. And it's very similar to the original Albert Watson story we had a couple of weeks back. But how are you finding those who would fit what you required, that would be good test cases, if you will?
I'd usually use social media, something like Instagram, and I'd find the people that I found compelling, that I found interesting, and I'd just offer them I'd send them a contact sheet and said you can choose a couple of headshots for, you know, that's the exchange. I'll do the post production on them for you. And whichever ones I choose, I will also send you them. So it was time for print.
It would be tempting, I suppose, in those early days, then to be giving everything away. How did you avoid giving the proverbial moon on a stick?
I actually had a time for print contract that I'd use each time, which our agreed amount of images that they'd receive, and then I would have a rate after that of what they would pay per image if they were to go outside of that. And quite often that was the case. And I think a lot of people, like at that time, and you know, I had no work, I was doing test shoots. I think a lot of people were, if you get along really well, you know, they were like, we'll chuck a couple more on, you know, which was always super nice for me.
So you're very much a low-key specialist, aren't you? You employ the stuff that I see on the website anyway, the stuff that you obviously enjoy, and the stuff that goes up onto your Instagram, is a darker background. It's more moody. Rembrandt lighting can be seen in full effect. Is that your preference? Have you decided to shoot that way to steer clear of the more democratic white backgrounds that you see other people shooting on?
Well, I still do shoot on democratic white backgrounds. I just don't tend to post that up because I'm very strict with myself with this, and I want to shoot the images that I want to shoot. And I don't particularly want to get hired to shoot a democratic white background. And if you look at the competitors in Sydney, everyone's got that pasted on their websites, which is great, and they do a really good job. However, A lot of the time when people contact me, it's because I do have a darker tone, and it is a little bit more dramatic, and they notice that. So it's sort of how I've marketed myself.
Michael, I know one of the facets of your business that you take very seriously is preparation. Knowing your client, knowing what you want to shoot, and sticking to your principles, which I think a lot of photographers, and I'll include myself in that, find very difficult. But I know in your case you're not afraid of declining jobs that don't fit.
Well, I think preparation's important. A couple of months ago, I had a agency call me for their client was a law firm, and they wanted to update all their headshots for the website, and they wanted the dark background and the dramatic Rembrandt style lighting. Everything was looking great, but the room they had was very, very small. I can't remember the exact dimensions, but, like a 2x1, sort of thing. And there was a very large table in the middle because I requested a picture of the room. And I said, can the table be removed? The agency got back to the client. The client got back to me and said, no, we can't remove the table. And I think because I prepped for that, I actually just said no to the job. It's at this point, I can see where this is going. It's they don't understand what's involved with making these style of portraits. And I tried to explain, to get that passed on, but it wasn't client direct. And I think it's just knowing when to say no as well, because you can say yes to everything, and then you can end up in that room with that table, and that's not worth it. That's really not worth it.
How many years have you been doing this as relevant to your yes and no? I'm intrigued.
Right. So full time, 3 years.
3 years.
And then I was doing freelance gigs before.
Now that's the interesting bit, you see, because at some stage you have to make a decision as a photographer to say yes or no. And I think, and I'm going to include myself in this. It's far too easy for me to say yes, and I'm very, very loath to say no. You've got to that point, but reasonably briskly, it seems.
I did photo assisting with people more experienced and very vocal about these particular things,
Yeah.
And I think it was really drilled into me when I was younger that that's not how you do it. So I think that just comes from learning from mentors.
On the website, you ask the question, and I like this: do headshots exist? Is it a headshot or is it a portrait? Because sometimes they do meld, don't they? Particularly with the more standard type of business portraits. There's very much there's a grey area between the two, aren't there?
There certainly is, yeah. And I know my answer to that is I feel like it's a portrait when it starts to portray someone. However, if you book me for a headshot, I'm still trying to portray who you are. So I think ultimately, I don't think there's much such thing as a headshot.
Is it lighting then? Or no, it's not really even the lighting, is it?
Well, no, I don't think it's the lighting. I think a headshot is just a portrait that is of your head and not much not much, like you wouldn't call a full body shot a headshot, although I've seen that too, headshot portfolios, and then there's a bunch of full lengths. I think it is a gray area.
Well, the reason I say that is because I did speak to another photographer recently who asked me if we could possibly not include that in the show, and I'm not going to say his stroke her name to identify them, but they were reasonably well known. And they said, when I asked about headshots and portraits, I didn't ask it the same way, but they said, I'm being very careful here not to reveal gender. But they said pretty much the same. Well, if it's just the head in a picture, it's a headshot. Otherwise, it's a portrait.
Right. Maybe I'm thinking too much about it, Neil. I don't know.
I like the idea that you suggest all portrait photographers go and get their portraits made so that they understand the experience, the feeling, the process, the investment maybe even.
I think it's extremely important. When I was inspired to do so by a Sean Tuck video, it was titled Empathy, and he posted the video up and basically just suggested it, and so I took his advice, and I went down to a photographer who I had assisted before, and I spoke to him. We rearranged the shoot, and I thought it was going to be easy. As soon as I sat there, I realized I had hands. I didn't know what to do with them. I was a bit of a mess, and I was like, how can I put people through this without knowing all these reactions that I'm having towards this camera. And obviously not everyone has that, but I certainly was. And from that moment, from every shoot forward, I just think this is one of the things in my prep, but particularly if it's a portrait shoot, it's part of my prep. It's just going back to that feeling, and when they come in, the way I greet them and how I act in the very initial stages is basically a lot of that came from how I felt when I was sitting there in front of the camera, and then it all just hit me at once. And obviously I wouldn't be alone in that. That would happen to almost everyone.
And so what was that experience like?
There was one particular image that when we were doing the cull, going through the images together, we just did it straight after the shoot. And it was like I'd never seen myself before. It was actually quite emotional, and I couldn't, I still can't quite articulate what it is, but when you look in the mirror, it's like you instantly shape yourself to how you want to see yourself.
Yeah.
And it's really hard just to capture a glimpse of who you are and the way you look. But in this one particular image, I mean, he really, if his job was to make a portrait of me, he succeeded, because it was like I was looking back at myself, and that was a very odd feeling, and that made me feel like what we do as photographers is so valuable, because to experience that, you can't, I couldn't actually put money on that. It was a very, very deep experience.
And that actually takes me under customer expectation, because I think that's the hardest thing about portrait work, is customer expectation. They'll come in expecting to see themselves like they see themselves in the mirror. It's the old cliche, but it's never it's never going to be that experience when they look at these pictures back. How do you prepare them for that?
I think what really an advantage that I have in that my light's not too flat and not too filled is that I don't really think many people have seen themselves in such dramatic light anyway, and that sort of takes a distraction away. I tether, so it's how I deal with it is I tether. We shoot for a bit, and I just talk while I'm shooting. I'm getting a bit of everything, and then I get a gauge through their reaction. I get them to star them, of which they think they look good, and not photographically, just like what they feel confident in. I'll just take a few notes of what they liked, and then we'll go through number 2, and we'll do this again. And say this is for an actor headshot, which obviously isn't as dramatic. It has to be a bit more clear. But what I tend to do is after I've shot the picture, like the headshot they're going to use, the one they're really happy with, we've tethered, we've seen the shot, we're both happy. I always try and get them back in front of the camera, and then we'll do some different setups. And most people by that time, I like to think I'm a lot of fun to shoot with, but by that time, we're having fun, and it just continues. And that's the moments when I'm really can't believe this is my job. This is just amazing. Like just playing in the studio. And
how long is a session then? Because it sounds like if you're tethering, that obviously that bit makes it a slightly longer process.
Well, my shoots I believe are quite long, yeah. If someone comes in for an actor headshot, I spend at least 2 hours with them, and that includes having a coffee at the beginning and getting to know each other. But yeah, 2 hours is what I allocate. Obviously, if it's a corporate headshot, some people will tell me they have 15 minutes, and that's the way it has to be, and that's a completely different shoot. It looks completely different, but I like to spend 2 hours with people.
Do you include makeup in that as well, or
no? Generally, for most of my work, I've worked with a makeup artist a handful of times, but most of my work it doesn't require a makeup artist.
So let's get back to this whole Sydney operation thing. What's been the hardest side of opening a business in that city environment where the competition is higher?
Yeah, the hardest part to me is coming here and not knowing anybody. So I didn't have any contacts, and then as I developed contacts, particularly photography contacts, I realized that when you grow up in Sydney and your uncle's an art director, maybe, and you just have a flow of contacts, whereas I came here with nothing. So the hardest part has just been getting my foot in. I mean, it's saturated, but I don't tend to tell people, people complain that it's saturated, but I really don't think it is. Like I managed to break in, and I'm nothing special, So I think the hardest part is just initially getting the contacts, initially getting a foot in the door. But once you do, it is kind of feels like it does feel like you have been here a while, because referrals are huge in Sydney. It feels like everyone in certain industries, for example, actors is a great one. Yeah. The referrals from actors are just amazing. You meet one and then all of a sudden all their friends are actors too. And it's the same with photography. You go to an exhibition and there's lots of faces there, even though we're in a big city.
So self-doubt, we're going to come on to the more technical and the business nature of it in the second half. But self-doubt, I do want to talk about, because we talk about this a lot, actually, the mental health of photographers on this show, unashamedly, and I'm happy to as well. Self-doubt is something that many photographers suffer from. And, of course, the famous imposter syndrome, which I think that probably gets the most mentions. What's your advice to photographers? Now you've set up a business in a city, it's flourishing, it's doing well, you've made your name.
Yeah, imposter syndrome. I feel like there's two types of people. You'll have imposter syndrome, or you'll have the opposite, which is the Dunning-Kruger effect, where basically you think that you're a lot better than you actually are. Imposter syndrome obviously being the opposite. And I think just recognizing what imposter syndrome is and realizing that a lot of people go through it, research it, and it is hard. And I feel like every now and then you're always going to get a bit of an imposter syndrome, Just researching and recognizing that it's a very common thing, especially within creative people. Once you realize that, you're able to recognize it when it starts to come. I've been reading a lot of Marcus Aurelius lately. And I think I've been reading Meditations, his book, and
so a Stoic approach.
A Stoic approach, yeah, that's right. You could say imposter syndrome smiles at us all, and all you can do is smile back. I don't know. Yeah. If you do read old books and old philosophy books and stuff, you actually realize these things have existed for a long time as well. So just getting familiar with it, like anything that's scary. Once you're familiar with it, you're able to deal with it better.
Back with Michael Quelch in a moment. A couple of weeks ago, Albert Watson appeared on the show to talk about his incredible career. And he's coming back, as promised. But we thought it might be fun and revealing for you to have the opportunity to ask him some of the questions. 50 years in the business, there must be a few. So write to studio@photographydaily.show, studio@photographydaily.show with your questions for the legend who is Albert Watson, coming soon again. Question: what do most camera ambassadors have in common? They use Fundy Designer in their wedding and portrait businesses, the #1 album design and wall art sales software. So, get the leading software used by the world's most profitable photographers for designing and selling your albums, wall art collections, cards, studio magazines, and more. Download the free trial, or you can save an extra 25% with the discount code, which is Photography Daily. Right, back to Michael Quelch. Michael, one thing I know you do, because you told me, was that you retouch for other photographers.
Yeah, that's right. It keeps me busy, and in the times when I'm down and other studios are still up, I'm still getting work. So it's a really nice way to keep things consistent financially.
Has it taught you things about your own business as well by retouching other people's work?
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. It's almost like you're constantly in the nicest way possibly, like you're critiquing everyone's work. 'Cause when it's something you haven't shot, but then you're doing something as like editing it and being so close with it, you really start to. I think it's really good for creativity, because you really start to think, oh, I wouldn't have done that, or you'll see a certain expression, you'd be like, why can't I get anyone to give me that? Why? Yeah. What was said during this, and then you start to think about what it might have been, and it's I think it's really good for creativity, and a lot of people don't like post-production, so there's that. But I love post-production, so I really like having these studios. Yeah.
On that note, actually, when you say you wonder what was being said at the time, what is your conversation like? I don't think we actually drilled down. I know you said you like to make it fun. It's breezy. It's conversational. You do your research. And when I shoot somebody, I tend to, I don't like to make it sound like it is an interview, but I kind of put the same attention in as if I can. Not everybody has this kind of information available, but if I was doing a podcast interview.
Yeah, and I've always related the two together, that taking someone's portrait is a lot like interviewing them and finding someone. I call it breaking the character character that they've given you when they've arrived. They're always going to come to the studio with a character, and your job is to break that character, to reveal who they truly are, you know. So how I work, it's conversational, but I can't always have their mouth going up and down, you know. So then every now and then when we touch on a subject, I'll just tell them to hold that. Yeah. And then sometimes I'll get to hold it for a ridiculous amount of time, because I know they're going to start wondering what the hell I'm doing, or I won't be shooting. I'll just look through the eyepiece. So then I wait for that reaction to be, what are you doing? You know, and then there'll be something gold within that a lot of the time. Although if you'll notice on a lot of my work, it's very rare that there'll be people smiling. It's a very serious tone. And that also comes from, I like to drive the conversation to very serious topics.
Do you?
And I really do. For example, I had... he's actually a friend of mine now, Keith Thomas, who I shot his photographs, and we were talking about when he was at war. And I said, Keith, if you don't mind, can you close your eyes and go to a place within that war and think about something that me, the photographer here, would have no idea how to comprehend that, would have no idea, having never been to war and having, you know, been born in 1991. So he closed his eyes. I said, take as long as you want. When he opened his eyes, he gave me what I consider the best portrait I've ever taken. It just came out of him. You know, he really went there in his head. And I think that's honestly why I love portraiture so much. It's those moments.
So let's talk about some of the technical aspects of your business, Michael. I want to talk about lighting. We touched on Rembrandt lighting, and of course you can go look up a million YouTube films to find out how to do Rembrandt lighting. But those early shoots to where you are now, what's changed?
I think there's always like very subtle changes you make to your lighting. I definitely feel more now. I used to be Caravaggio dramatic, you know. It wasn't so Rembrandt. It was ultra dramatic, but I had to stop that because actually there wasn't much of a market for the ultra Caravaggio drama.
Yeah.
So I definitely use a lot more fill, and as I've got to more knowledge of the city I'm in, I'm choosing studios that's suitable for me as well. So that also, you know, I don't choose a cyclorama white cyc. I choose a black box to work in because that's how I know I can achieve my style a lot better that way. So that comes down to preparation.
And it looks to me like quite a simple setup, but I think you're going to tell me it's more complex than one key, one fill, perhaps.
Yeah, well, I actually use quite a few lights, admittedly. I use a key. I usually use one negative fill, and I use my key light. I use one snoot that's up against the background, and then I have a strip box as my rim light, and then I use a bunch of polys around to flag the lights I already have. So I actually can never maintain a clean set. It's always very messy with the amount of equipment I'm using. However, my bag is a lot more humble.
I want to lead you back toward the start of your journey, your move to Sydney, which is only quite recent if you think about it, and this may include how you would have done things differently with your tech setup as well. When I talk about your advice, if there's anything you may have done differently.
I think I would have done a lot of things differently. I think having a process that you're doing every day to help with your marketing is super important. For example, software like Trello. If I only knew about Trello years and years ago, I've actually only recently discovered it in the last couple of years, but there is software out there like Trello, which you can create boards and you can write down your daily to-dos. Whether you're doing an email campaign, say, for example, if you wanted to attract theatres, local theatres, for example, you'd make a list of all the theatres, the ones that are out of your league at the moment and the ones that, you know, are mid and the ones that are probably accessible, probably like smaller theatres for when you're starting. And then you can organize it. So say you've emailed them, you can click on that client card, you can put in the email you've sent. If you've had a response, if you've had no response, you can color code them. It just puts everything in this beautiful box that you have control over. It makes you feel a lot less stressed too when you have a lot of tasks you want to do, but where do I start? You know, I think my advice would be to put your marketing strategies onto paper, or in this case, you know, into your computer, and really have it organized, because then you can see where you want to go. so you can see where your strategy is going to lead you.
So that's organising day to day. What about your social media? I know you're not a Facebook user. You're unconvinced by the merits of it for your business, but you do enjoy Instagram, and it seems to work well in the way that you like to research prospective clients too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I just find Instagram, I can search for a hashtag and search for, a local theatre, for example, one that hasn't started yet, or Sydney actors. There's a bunch of hashtags for a bunch of people that you might want to be working with. And then just by being social, by giving them a follow, following what they're doing, interacting with the things you're generally interested in, then it's a genuine client when it comes around. It's just being social and being as social as you can and dedicating time to be social on it. Because you might think, oh, but I'm on it doing this and that when I'm at the bus stop. But it takes a lot of time. These things take a lot of time.
Michael, we'll clearly all have tough moments in our businesses. Sometimes they're the decisions we make, either in terms of a noughts and crosses business decision, or they can be more creative in their form. What's been the toughest so far? Perhaps something that you think you've learned from?
Tough moments. So I always find a tough moment. Well, for example, I had a client call me out of nowhere. She found me through a Google search, and she says she's turning 50 years old, and she just wants a portrait of herself because she's never experienced that before. She's never had it, and I was super excited about that because that's really nice. It's just a portrait. There's no sort of other intention behind the image. And I was speaking to her on the phone, and I was telling her about the process and how it all works. And I did tell her as well that I'm really excited to shoot it because there is no other intention. It's just a pure portrait that's really nice. However, she sends me some examples via email, maybe a week later, and it's all boudoir shots. And this was tough because I don't want to recommend anyone because I don't know any boudoir shooters. So I can't say, hey, I can't look online, find someone who does some really great work and recommend them, because I feel like this is such an intimate thing. I don't want any of my recommendations to reflect badly on me in any way. So I couldn't recommend anyone she could go to. And I found it really hard to tell her that's not what I do, because as you know, when you don't specialize in certain things, like if you give me a product to shoot, it's a whole nother game. And I think it's the same. Well, it is the same with boudoir. I don't do that. Yeah. I can't do that. And you shouldn't do that, because, people are paying good money for photography, and it needs to, you need to really hone in and do what you do and do it well, and not just scatter around everywhere. I think that's important. So I had to manage her expectations, and I find that extremely difficult because it's a whole person on the other end. And because she's come to me with a very personal thing too, I find like I've got a person in front of me now, and every word I say, something might hurt her confidence, something might hurt, something might dig deep. And those situations, because we are working with people and being sensitive to that, it often can be hard, because the risk of offending someone or causing any certain hurt is too great.
It's interesting because many people would have just said, no, that's not the sort of thing I do, and moved on. But
I think
you tried to, you obviously took an empathic approach.
Yeah, I'm guilty. I'm an empath for sure. And you're right. A lot of people would have just said, that's not what I do, at this point.
So how did you resolve this problem then?
Well, we did shoot her portrait like we originally spoke about on the phone. We went ahead with the shoot. I ended up just talking to her, and she said, "You know what? I've spoke to you now, and I feel comfortable with you. So I would like to come in for the shoot, but we won't do the boudoir stuff.
We'll do the portrait."
So
yeah,
we will do the portrait. Yeah,
isn't that interesting? That shows how important it is to have empathy and not just steer somebody towards the way you want to do stuff, but to explain the way that you work and how you feel about a shoot.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Yeah.
What about the future then, Michael?
At the moment, I've been quite driven. I've put in a lot of focus into moving towards more editorial portraiture, and I want to work with bigger theatres and bigger clients. So what I've done recently is I just out of nowhere, I just had this idea. I just printed out my book, sent it online, came through. I wrote a handwritten letter to an art director, one of the bigger art directors in the theatre scene in Sydney. Found the PO box online and just popped it in the mail. So I'm just trying new ideas to get attention, and I think that's for anyone in the photography business or coming into it, I think it's really important to have creative ways to also grab people's attention, because people are busy. People are sometimes a follow on social media won't be enough. So I'm trying to reach out and expand the business and work with larger clients.
Isn't that interesting that it does come back sometimes to this this wonderful handwritten experience? I've heard so many photographers and creatives talking about this of late, and directors, funnily enough, talking about this of late, the joy of receiving something handwritten.
Yeah, it's you can touch it, it feels, smells, it's tangible, and yeah. I think it's so important. When you print your work, it's the same feeling, right? It's wow, this is alive. This is a real thing.
It is all time, obviously, isn't it? But often we say, why won't they buy a print? Because they can hold it in their hand and understand and feel the beauty and all that. And then we send an email.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, we need to practice what we preach, eh?
My thanks to Michael Quelch. News of Wednesday's show in a moment. That's it for today. Keep sending your questions, feedback and photo stories to studio@photographydaily.show so that I can feature you in the mailbag edition, which is the Friday Photo Walk show. On that note, remember you can also send in pictures from your own photo walks to appear on the episode's show page online with links to your website or Instagram. If you haven't yet, join our private Facebook group, which has just ticked over the 500 now. There's a large community waiting for you in there, and follow us on Instagram. Links to all this and our guests, of course, and wonderful supporters on Patreon will be on the Photography Daily show page today, linked to in your podcast player app as always. Wednesday, we hear from Gulnara Samoilova, who came to America from a part of Russia where she was the only female art photographer in a very large region. She's championed since then women's street photographers and just edited a book about that, featuring 100 photographers worldwide.
If you live in a small village in the middle of India and you have a phone and you go outside of your home on a dirt road and you're taking pictures, in my opinion, it is a street photography.
She also talks about the World Press Photo Award, won for her outstanding courageous work on 9/11.
I was out of my breath because the air was so thick. So I began choking. And what snapped me out of it was somebody else was hiding behind the same car. So his question, he asked me are you okay?
Music on the show from the incredible artlist.io. I look forward to photographing with you, hearing from you and talking with you. Wednesday.
Photography Daily is a Loading Zone production.